Tonight, you'll enter the war the world forgot, a brutal conflict buried between World War glory and Cold War headlines. This isn't a lecture, it's a second-person immersive journey. You'll live inside a war that never truly ended. So close your eyes, let memory return, and drift into the forgotten fight. You're lying there, back aching, maybe from the floor mat, maybe from 35 years of Japanese imperialism. You'd think the defeat of Japan in 1945 would feel like freedom, but it mostly feels like confusion. The imperial sun has set, sure, but all it leaves behind is a peninsula now sliced like a bad wedding cake. The 38th parallel wasn't carved by geographers or prophets, it was drawn hastily by two US Army officers staring at a National Geographic map, trying to make Cold War math fit into Korean mountains. North goes Soviet, south goes American. No one asks you what you think. They never do. In the north, Red Army boots stomp across Manchuria and into Pyongyang, followed closely by ideology in block letters. In the south, American soldiers land with smiles, chewing gum, and a vague sense of democratic mission. It's like being adopted by two very different step-parents, who both swear they love you more, but mostly just want to remodel the house and leave you the bill. The plan, they say, is temporary. The word temporary in geopolitics is always a lie in a tuxedo. Both the Soviets and Americans promise to leave as soon as Korea can manage its own affairs, which is rich, considering they're the reason you now have barbed wire cutting across your farms and railways. But, sure, you try to believe them. You try to farm, to build, to maybe even dream a little, but already the whispers start that the South is plotting with foreign capitalists, that the North is brainwashing school children, that you, yes you, might be sympathizing with the wrong side. Families begin dividing themselves before the governments even get the chance. By 1948, the occupation ends, though not really. Instead, it evolves. In the South, Syngman Rhee declares the Republic of Korea. A man once exiled, now back in power, armed with an American endorsement and a penchant for jailing critics. In the North, Kim Il-sung, the Soviet-trained guerrilla with revolutionary swagger, proclaims the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Neither of those names are subtle. Both claim all of Korea as their rightful home. Both believe the other is a temporary nuisance. You're in the middle, and that middle starts to shrink by the day. By now, both sides have real armies, not parades with flags kind of armies. We're talking tanks, uniforms, ranks, and orders barked in loud accents. North Korea fields the Korean People's Army. The South forms the Republic of Korea Army. You may recognize some faces. Many of these soldiers are the same men who fought the Japanese, just under new banners, new slogans. The revolution is apparently modular. Tensions rise like summer humidity. Raids flicker across the 38th parallel. The line becomes a rumor, then a target. Police skirmishes turn into artillery bursts. And you start to wonder if the Second World War actually ended or just changed wardrobe. The Americans seem distracted. Europe's the main event. Korea is the warm-up band. General MacArthur gets vague orders to do something if something happens, which is as comforting as being told your dentist might show up to the surgery, maybe. Even in Washington, the mood is dismissive. Korea, that backwater, who would want that headache? Well, Kim Il-sung would, and he has ideas, big ones. But those ideas can wait until you open your eyes again. So you're Kim Il-sung now, or rather, you're in his fine leather boots, pacing inside a stuffy Pyongyang office that smells of pipe smoke, damp maps, and Soviet ink. You're brooding, which is your default state, and you've got one pressing thought: reunify Korea by force. Why? Because the South is weak, distracted, and full of people who, if they just saw your glorious red banners flapping over Seoul, would surely come running with flowers and revolutionary chants. Probably, maybe, hopefully. But you can't just wake up and invade. You're a disciplined communist, as you remind your Soviet handlers every 5 minutes. That means you need Comrade Stalin's blessing before you go full throttle. And so begins the Great Ask, which is less a formal request and more a long, drunken ramble at a Soviet embassy party. You're a bit tipsy, which might explain why you keep repeating, "If Stalin won't say yes, I'll ask Mao." Nothing like a little emotional blackmail with your vodka. Stalin plays it cool. He's more into Europe these days, Berlin airlifts, spy novels, that kind of thing. Korea's important, sure, but not worth a showdown with the Americans. Unless, of course, the Americans aren't interested. That's the magic phrase. Stalin gives a cautious nod, sends some tanks, and reminds you we're not coming if it goes badly. Translation, good luck and don't call us. Still, that's enough. You take what you can get, including a whole bunch of Korean veterans from Mao's army who show up with discipline, combat experience, and some absolutely atrocious marching songs. Mao, unlike Stalin, is actually enthusiastic. After all, Korea is a buffer zone, a political chessboard, and a chance to show that the new communist China isn't just about rice paddies and little red books. So you gather your forces, quietly, methodically. It's January 1950, and by now you've got about 223,000 troops under your command. Tanks, check. Artillery, oh yes. Airplanes, that are mostly Soviet hand-me-downs. Sure, who needs luxury when you've got numbers and revolutionary zeal? Meanwhile, in the south, Syngman Rhee is also preparing, mostly by giving long speeches and imprisoning anyone who frowns too hard in public. The Republic of Korea Army, ROK, is respectable in numbers, but sorely lacking in gear. They've got 87,500 troops, no tanks, and very few ways to stop your big metal friends from rolling straight into Seoul. Rhee, for his part, keeps boasting that he'll take Pyongyang by Christmas, though he never says which year. You set the date, June 24 a.m., a Sunday, the kind of morning when everyone expects peace, and what they get instead is artillery thunder and tank treads humming across soft dirt. The KPA surges south, 3 concentrated spearheads breaking through flimsy defenses like a sledgehammer through paper. Your plan isn't subtle, but it's working. The capital of Seoul panics. ROK forces collapse faster than expected. The few units trying to mount a defense fall into disarray. Bridges are blown up too early, leaving tens of thousands of ROK troops trapped. You, or at least your officers, step into Seoul's outskirts before the week is out. Syngman Rhee flees southward, and it's hard not to smirk, although, to be fair, he smirks right back later when he gets a new American airbase. And here's the ironic bit. Some South Koreans, not all, but enough to notice, greet your soldiers like long-lost brothers. After all, you speak the same language, wear the same faces. They don't see a brutal communist vanguard yet. They see cousins. The optimism won't last long, but it's a moment. One of those odd little footnotes that historians later argue about. Did they really cheer? Was it staged? What did it mean? And then there's the Americans, blinking in disbelief across the Pacific. Their first instinct isn't to defend Korea. Nope, they rush their navy to the Taiwan Strait to protect Chiang Kai-shek. Korea was supposed to hold. Why didn't it hold? Because you knew the South was brittle, and they didn't. Within days, the United Nations is on the line, or more accurately, not on the line, because the Soviet Union is boycotting the Security Council in protest over China's seat. With no Soviet veto, the US gets a resolution passed to send armed forces to aid South Korea. Suddenly, you're not just fighting Rhee's army, you're about to fight the world. But for now, you keep moving forward. And as Seoul burns behind you, you can almost taste it, that dream of one Korea, red and proud. But history doesn't care about your dreams, and across the sea someone named MacArthur is polishing his medals and making very loud plans. Those plans will find you soon enough. You're in a tent now, canvas, damp, mosquito-ridden, somewhere just off the 38th parallel, and you've just learned that your police action is now officially a United Nations command. which sounds fancy until you realize that means every angry cold warrior with a uniform is about to send you either orders, supplies, or long-winded memos. The Cold War has just gone hot, and you are now its kindling. Welcome to the Korean Peninsula, 1950, the most heavily armed chessboard on Earth. Every piece is moving now, and you're the pawn, just trying not to get stepped on. Let's take a moment to review what just happened. North Korea, drunk on Stalinist approval and Soviet tanks, blitzed southward like it was the opening level of a war-themed video game. Seoul fell within days. The Republic of Korea army scattered like startled pigeons. Syngman Rhee looked nervous, but still found time to execute leftists on his way out of town. Priorities, right? And the Americans, well, they were caught mid-nap. Despite their massive military-industrial complex and global reach, Korea was not on the list. Seriously, that's what Dean Akerson, the Secretary of State, had said back in January. Korea wasn't within the United States' defensive perimeter. Oops. But now, Truman is wide awake, and his pride is bruised. Japan's just across the sea, and if Korea falls, dominoes might start tumbling across Asia. Or so goes the logic of the time. So the United States makes a decision, intervene fast, intervene loud, and hope no one notices how unprepared they actually are. First to arrive, Task Force Smith, named after its commander because originality is for peacetime. Their mission, delay the North Koreans just long enough to buy time. It's the military equivalent of throwing a chair at a train. They march into place near Osan with 540 under-equipped men, light artillery, and blind optimism. You, dear pawn, are in that unit. What follows is the military version of a rude awakening. When the North Korean T-34 tanks roll into view, your bazookas bounce off like you're tossing pebbles at an armored car. The men fight bravely, retreat chaotically, and leave behind a harsh lesson. Wechoy we glory doesn't mean much when your enemy has momentum and you have nostalgia. Historians still argue whether Task Force Smith was brave or foolish, but what's clear is that they bought precious hours. Hours the UN forces used to scramble together a defense line further south, centering around a port city called Busan. It becomes known as the Busan Perimeter, a last-ditch stronghold forming a lopsided horseshoe along the southeastern coast. It's your new home, muddy, crammed, nervous, but, for now, defensible. The Koreans, north and south, are not the only ones on this stage anymore. Reinforcements from Britain, Canada, Australia, and even Turkey begin to trickle in. The world has decided to rally behind the South, mostly to show Stalin that pushing borders comes with consequences. Also, there's that tricky issue of face. You can't just let communists march down the peninsula without looking weak, right? Meanwhile, MacArthur is fuming in Tokyo. His medals practically rattle with indignation. He sees Korea not just as a war, but as his war, the ultimate encore for his already theatrical life. He pushes for total commitment, grand plans, and, of course, full media coverage. Back in Washington, Truman is trying to rein him in with the grace of someone herding tigers with a fishing rod. Meanwhile, you're on the ground building sandbag bunkers and trying not to step on anti-personnel mines. The North Koreans keep pressing like a slow, inevitable tide. They control nearly the entire peninsula now, except for the southeastern pocket. Every day brings artillery, confusion, and rumors, some true, most not, of American reinforcements and Chinese whispers. And still, you wait. Your boots rot. Your uniform smells like damp metal and old fear. The monsoon turns everything into a slow soup. You eat Spam, trade cigarettes, and try to sleep while the sky hums with aircraft. You wonder, in quiet moments, how many cousins you might have on the other side of the wire, if any of them are aiming their rifles your way now. And then, like a magic trick, there's a shift. Supplies start arriving. Ammunition, troops, tanks. The North Koreans, stretched thin and far from their own supply lines, begin to falter just slightly, enough to breathe, not enough to relax. MacArthur smells the opportunity, but his counterattack, it won't come from Busan. It will come from the sea, and that idea, well, it's just crazy enough to work. You're seasick before the ship even leaves harbour. The ocean is dark and cold, and MacArthur's big idea is about to make you the centerpiece of a maneuver that sounds more like a gamble than a strategy. You're part of X-Corps now, heading not forward through the front lines at Pusan, but looping around to the west coast to a place called Incheon. Ever heard of it? No? That's because nobody in their right mind would plan an amphibious landing there. The tides are monstrous, the harbour is shallow, and the mudflats stretch for miles. Incheon has one usable landing zone and only a few hours of favourable tide a day. Also, just a minor footnote, it's defended, poorly but defended nonetheless. Still, MacArthur loves drama. He declares the landing will be like pulling the plug out of a fan, and that once UN forces land there, the whole North Korean invasion will fall apart. It's a metaphor that sounds ridiculous until it works. September 15th, 1950. You hit the beach. It's chaos, naturally. The LST ramps slam down, and the first waves of Marines rush through the mud, water, and smoke. You stagger after them, adrenaline drowning out your sense of time. The resistance is lighter than expected, thanks to a daring bombardment and sheer surprise. Within hours, the beachhead is secure, and Walmido Island is under control. You look around at the crumpled defences and think, that's it? Not quite. Now comes the push toward Seoul. It's a city in ruins, a place where every corner is booby-trapped, every basement potentially hiding KPA stragglers. Urban warfare is not your specialty. You prefer enemies who wear uniforms and stand in lines. Here, the enemy wears dust and melts into alleyways. Still, the operation surges forward, inch by inch, block by block. UN forces reclaim the South Korean capital. On September 25, Seoul is declared liberated. Again, it won't be the last time. And while you're fighting through abandoned buildings and burned-out streetcars, something strange happens. The pressure on the Pusan perimeter eases. Like a magician yanking a tablecloth, the Incheon landing forces the KPA to pull back fast. Their overextended supply lines collapse, and they begin a chaotic retreat northward. What felt like an impossible war 3 weeks ago now seems winnable. There's a moment, a brief golden window, where it feels like the whole war might end by Christmas. That maybe, just maybe, you'll be home in time to watch. It's a Wonderful Life in Technicolor. MacArthur's forces recapture almost the entire South in a matter of weeks. You march past towns that once looked like enemy territory, now filled with relieved civilians and wary looks. Not everyone is celebrating, though. Some people in Seoul remember the initial northern occupation fondly. They speak Korean like you, they say. They dress like us. They whisper. At first, they seemed like long-lost brothers, one local says later. And you begin to realize this war isn't just about ideology. It's about family, geography, and 1,000 grudges older than your army-issued boots. Still, there's no time for reflection. Orders come down, advance past the 38th parallel. That magical line drawn in bureaucratic ink back in 19... It's now a memory. South Korean forces surge ahead. You follow them. The plan is simple. Chase the KPA to the Yalu River and finish the job. Wipe out the North Korean state. Reunify Korea. Bring democracy to Pyongyang, preferably with a good PR photo. But not everyone is thrilled about this. Britain and other UN allies start twitching nervously. There's a border at the Yalu on the other side. China, and behind them, the Soviet Union, watching like a bored older brother, daring you to throw the first punch. Historians still argue whether MacArthur's push north was strategic brilliance or geopolitical overreach. But in your boots, it just feels like ambition stretching its legs. And so you march over hills where the wind bites and the trees are already turning to skeletal brown. The victories keep coming. Pyongyang falls on October 19. North Korean troops vanish into forests and mountains. You feel like a ghost moving through villages abandoned before your arrival. The war is almost over. Almost, because right now, unseen in the foggy mountains ahead, thousands of Chinese troops are waiting, watching, preparing, and when they arrive, they won't come politely. They'll come at night with horns and bugles and no warning. But that can wait until the sun sets. You're sleeping in your boots now, not by choice. It's just that the cold has teeth, and if you take them off, you might not get them back on. It's November and you're somewhere in North Korea, just a few dozen miles from the Chinese border. You've been told the war is practically over, that the enemy is scattered, that the final push will be a victory march, not a bloodbath. You'd laugh if your breath didn't fog the air so thickly. Then, around 10 p.m., the mountains start to scream. Not metaphorically, literally. Trumpets, gongs, whistles, sounds that belong more to a haunted opera than a battlefield. And through the shadows and snow, they come, the Chinese, tens of thousands, maybe more. They don't march, they swarm, lightly armed, wearing old padded jackets and straw shoes. They descend from the hills like a wave of ghosts. This is the battle of the Chomchon River, but to you it's more like a bad dream on repeat. 1 minute you're eating a can of beans, the next you're in a firefight with people who seem to have emerged from the snow itself. You fire back, of course, but your bullets don't seem to slow them. They're relentless, tireless, and very, very loud. You fall back fast. What was supposed to be a triumphant push to the Yalu River becomes a frantic, freezing retreat. Vehicles get stuck, supplies vanish. You leave behind mortars, boots, wounded friends, everything but your rifle and your heartbeat. In the chaos, the US 8th Army collapses. Units scatter, morale craters. Even the most hardened officers are blinking like deer in headlights. This isn't how it was supposed to go. You were the liberator, the victor, the force of modernity. Now you're just a guy with a gun, running from men in canvas shoes. And the Chinese, they're not even officially in the war. Oh no, they're volunteers. That's the party line. Just a few 100,000 communist volunteers who happen to be extraordinarily organized, heavily coordinated, and mysteriously equipped with Soviet hardware. Historians still argue whether Mao truly wanted war, or was dragged into it by fear, pride, and Stalin's nudging. Some say he acted defensively, panicked at the thought of US forces parking themselves on China's doorstep. Others argue it was ambition, a chance to show the world that the People's Republic wasn't just talk. Either way, you're the one getting shot at. Meanwhile, MacArthur's confidence takes its first real bruising. He hadn't expected this. In his mind, wars end with medals, not frozen corpses. He sends back reports that downplay the Chinese presence, even as your platoon keeps reporting entire divisions vanishing into the hills. We'll be home by Christmas, he insists. You check the calendar. Christmas is 3 weeks away. The retreat becomes official. Entire divisions pull back southward. Seoul is once again under threat for the second time this year. You don't know what's worse, losing a city, or realizing you're probably going to lose it again. And as you trudge back down those icy roads, every mile earned in blood just weeks ago is now given up with curses and frostbite. There are rumors, always rumors, that Washington might consider nuclear options. MacArthur certainly hints at it. But Truman isn't interested in a third world war, especially not over terrain no one can pronounce. So you keep retreating past ruined towns, past shell-shocked villages who've now seen every side claim them, lose them, reclaim them, and lose them again. There's no joy in your boots, no fire in your belly, just the constant ache of exhaustion and the steady grinding knowledge that you're not fighting for victory anymore, you're fighting to survive. You think about home about how nobody there can find the Chongchon River on a map, much less pronounce it, about how the headlines say United Nations action and strategic redeployment, while you crouch behind a tree praying the next whistle isn't followed by a grenade. You wonder, and this thought comes softly, dangerously, if the war even knows what it wants anymore. It started with reunification. It moved to ideology. Now, it just feels like inertia, like history rolling downhill with no brakes. And somewhere, back in China, Mao is smiling. You don't remember much about leaving Pyongyang, just that it was cold, fast, and humiliating. You're part of what they now call a tactical withdrawal, which sounds so much cleaner than panic sprint. One moment you were guarding a street corner, the next you were ordered to fall back across the Taidong River again. It's hard to keep track. Cities seem to change hands here like playing cards. By the first week of December, the entire UN command is on its heels. MacArthur, whose ego previously inflated enough to launch its own weather system, is rattled, but instead of reassessing, he doubles down. He calls for reinforcements, suggests blockading China, and, not so subtly, floats the idea of dropping nuclear bombs. You blink, you yawn, you imagine what that would even look like. Probably bad for everyone involved, but especially for you. Meanwhile, you're pushed down the Korean peninsula, like dust swept off a table. On December 6th, the evacuation of Hungnam begins. You're part of it, one of thousands packed into ships, carrying what remains of gear, spirit, and legs that function under 20 pounds of frost. The Navy does its job. 105,000 soldiers evacuated, along with 98,000 refugees. That's the win of the month, apparently. A boat ride to anywhere feels like a miracle, even if it's only to Busan and back to war. But you're not the only one retreating. The Chinese advance isn't exactly a graceful ballet either. Their supply lines are stretched thin, reliant on porters and mules, and prone to collapse under snowfall. Soldiers share tattered coats and depend on captured US rations to stay warm. Tomato juice, it turns out, is the international beverage of disappointment. 2/3 of their casualties are from the cold. You'd feel sympathy if they weren't actively trying to shoot you. Historians still debate how many Chinese soldiers were really involved at this stage. Was it 200,000? 500,000? Did they win with numbers or with smarter tactics? Opinions diverge. What's not debated is the effect. The US 8th Army is shattered. Morale is down to soup levels. Veterans talk about the bugle nights, when Chinese attacks came with trumpet blasts, part signal, part terror weapon. The first time you heard it, you thought a high school marching band had lost its way and wandered into hell. In the eastern sector, things get even worse. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, you won't forget that one. X-Corps is separated from the 8th Army by mountain ranges and communication issues, and because General Armand thinks independence is a form of personality, you're not there yourself. But the stories drift down like the snow. 2 Marine columns trying to link up while surrounded by Chinese divisions. Temperatures dropping below 30 degrees, guns jamming, wounds freezing, bodies carried out strapped to tank fenders, frozen solid like statues from a war museum nobody wanted to visit. Task Force Faith, yes, that was their name, gets annihilated. Only a few hundred make it out in fighting condition. Colonel Don Faith, their leader, sends a desperate radio call. Unless someone can help us, I don't have much hope that anybody's going to get out of this. He dies a few hours later. You think about that line more than you should. The official spin. We're not retreating. We're just advancing in another direction. A Marine general said that, probably while his eyebrows froze over. You almost admire the goal. Almost. Still, credit where it's due. The Hungnam evacuation is a logistical ballet of steel and desperation. Engineers even drop bridge sections from planes to rebuild a path out of Funchalen Pass. It's the kind of thing that sounds heroic in newspapers and feels like a wet nightmare when you're the one dragging cables in the dark. Like Christmas 1950, you're back near the 38th parallel. Seoul is within spitting distance. Again, you've lost count of how many times it's been threatened, taken, defended, and retaken. At this point, the city might as well be renamed property of whoever gets there first. And MacArthur? He's still convinced China's bluffing. He believes victory is one last push away, that the Chinese offensive was a face-saving gesture. You, meanwhile, are busy figuring out how to keep your fingers from freezing off while digging a new foxhole in land that's already seen 3 years' worth of foxholes. You hear rumors of Washington losing patience, that the general's antics might be a bit too nuclear curious for the Truman administration's taste. That maybe, just maybe, someone will tell the old man to take a seat before he lights Asia on fire. But for now, your world is small. A shovel, a rifle, a cup of something hot if you're lucky. You dig in again, as if the last month of movement never happened. And the war, the one that promised liberation and democracy, it starts to feel more like a game of muddy chess, where every pawn thinks it's a queen, and every square's already been bombed twice. So you wait, you watch the frozen fields, and you wonder what the next sunrise will bring, enemy bugles, or just another silent dawn. Either way, you don't take off your boots. You don't even blink anymore when someone says, "Seoul has fallen." You just exhale, adjust your helmet, and check how many bullets you've got left. It's January 1951, and yes, the capital has changed hands again. You try to feel something about it, some patriotic flair or bitter anger, but mostly you feel hungry. Maybe it's the cold. Maybe it's the fact that you're standing in the same trench you were 3 months ago, only this time it's got a different name and more bullet holes. Enter the Americans again, this time in force. Truman has made up his mind. The US isn't going to lose Korea, even if they can't quite figure out how to win it. Reinforcements pour in, equipment upgrades, the lines stabilize, and then there's MacArthur, still in Tokyo, still holding court like a warlord with excellent posture. He's not just commanding armies, he's drafting manifestos about Chinese cities he'd like to bomb next. It's all very theatrical. But back in Washington, Truman's patience thins like summer ice. The president isn't interested in nuking Manchuria or escalating this skirmish into global thermonuclear charades. MacArthur, on the other hand, is openly criticizing his boss in letters that somehow always find their way into the press. Subtlety was never his strong suit. Historians still argue over whether MacArthur's insubordination was patriotic conviction or reckless megalomania. But for you, it's simpler. He's not here in this trench with you. He's not scraping frost off his rifle or wondering if his toes still technically qualify as toes. He's in a heated suite, dictating his memoirs to 4 assistants while you're digging through frozen rice paddies. So Truman fires him. Just like that. April 1951. A telegram, a headline, a shocked general packing up his corncob pipe. You hear about it on a battered radio between shellings. Some guys cheer, some mutter that he was your best chance of winning. You just sip your instant coffee and try to remember what winning even looks like anymore. MacArthur's replacement is General Matthew Ridgway, a man who wears grenades like jewelry and actually shows up to battlefields. No, really, the guy visits front lines wearing a grenade on each shoulder, as if daring enemy snipers to give him a new haircut. Morale lifts almost instantly, not because he's charming, but because he's present. The difference is palpable. Ridgway doesn't promise miracles. He promises stability. He reorganizes, reinforces, and pushes back methodically. Seoul is retaken again. Defensive lines are fortified north of the Han River. Suddenly, the war stops feeling like a runaway train, and more like an extremely unpleasant commute. Back home in the US, public opinion is a roller coaster. 1 minute they're rallying for justice, the next they're asking why their sons are freezing in a place they can't find on a globe. The war was supposed to be quick, clean. Instead, it's a grinding stalemate, with no clear end, and names like Battle of Chipyongni that sound more like bad spelling than military victories. Meanwhile, you settle into a strange routine. Patrols, skirmishes, more digging. Letters from home arrive with awkward questions like, "Are you okay?" and "When are you coming back?" You don't answer either, not because you're rude, but because you genuinely don't know. The Chinese keep probing the lines, night attacks, infiltration squads, whispered legends of a sniper who can hit a helmet at 600 meters. You start naming the rats in your bunker. Carl is the biggest. He gets first pick of crumbs. You tell yourself it's for morale. And then there's the psychological warfare, leaflets dropped by planes, trying to convince you the war is pointless, that your side has abandoned you. Sometimes you read them aloud just for laughs. Sometimes you're not laughing. By mid-1951, the front stabilizes roughly along the 38th parallel. The line no one cared about at the start of the war is now the bloodiest stretch of dirt on the peninsula. Both sides dig in, build bunkers, and trade fire like grumpy neighbors, throwing rocks over a fence. And you, poor soul, are stuck on that fence, wondering who forgot to end this war and why everyone's too embarrassed to admit it. But for now, there's calm, relative, fragile, frostbitten calm, the kind that precedes the next offensive, the next casualty list, the next time someone redraws the map in blood. And above it all, the wind howls over a land that still doesn't belong to either side. Not really. It belongs to the cold, the ghosts, and the exhausted soldiers like you who still remember when the war was supposed to be simple. Sleep if you can. So now you're in the southeast corner of Korea again. The map calls it Pusan, but to you it's more like the edge of the world, a battered boot print in the mud where the rest of the war crashes and then recoils. Welcome back. You've seen this place before during the first retreat, but now it's different. Now it's a fortress, and you're not just hiding, you're holding. The Pusan perimeter, they call it. It sounds clinical, almost scientific, like a test area for explosives. In reality, it's a crescent of desperation, about 140 miles long, wrapping around a few cities, rice fields, and sheer anxiety. You've got your back to the sea and your boots in the swamp. North Korean forces press from the west, the north and the northeast, everywhere basically. You try not to think about that. Back in August 1950, when this perimeter first took shape, it felt like a last stand. There were whispers that Washington might cut its losses, that Korea wasn't worth the blood, that Japan was more strategically important. You didn't hear that officially, of course, but soldiers talk, and rumors carry faster than artillery. You dig in. The earth is hard-packed and full of stones that don't want to move. Neither do you. Supplies trickle in, sometimes generously, sometimes late, always vital. Ammunition, food, dry socks, which become the currency of the trenches. You trade them like baseball cards. A clean pair is worth more than a handshake, and almost as much as a working radio. And then there are the South Korean forces, the Rocket Army, still raw, still reeling from the initial onslaught, but they're learning fast. Fear turns to resolve. Civilians, too, are pulled into the machine. Young men barely old enough to shave now carry rifles and stand watch beside you. You teach them how to load a weapon, how to keep the barrel dry, how to lie very still when the shells fall. Some of them even listen. The perimeter holds, just barely. You're fighting on hills, with numbers instead of names. Hill 303, Hill 742. Each one just high enough to matter, and just exposed enough to die on. North Korean tanks roll in from time to time, but you've learned their patterns. You've got bazookas now, real ones that actually work. The first time you see a T-34 burst into flames from your squad's fire, you almost cry. Almost. The Air Force joins in too. Finally, American planes streak overhead bombing supply lines, strafing convoys, keeping the pressure off just enough to let you breathe. The sound of jet engines becomes oddly comforting. It means you're not forgotten. Still, the fighting is brutal. It's not always trench warfare. Often it's house to house, ridge to ridge, foot by muddy foot. You lose friends, not all at once, not always to bullets. Some just vanish. One day they're beside you, The next, there's a blood-stained helmet and no body to match. You learn not to ask questions out loud. One morning, you hear something unusual. Silence. No mortars, no gunfire. Just wind through the grass and the buzz of flies. You climb a ridge, cautiously, and see it. The enemy is pulling back. It's not a rout, not yet, but they're faltering. You've held. After weeks of bombardment and attacks, the line didn't break. And that's when the rumors start. Not bad ones this time, good ones. Whispers about a counterattack, about MacArthur planning something big, something amphibious. You don't dare hope, not after everything. But then the supplies start piling up faster. Trucks roll in, artillery moves out, radios buzz with new codes and excitement, the kind that feels dangerous. The perimeter, once a cage, becomes a spring, and just like that the direction of the war changes. You're not out of the woods, of course, not even close, but the feeling is unmistakable, momentum. The North Koreans are overextended, their lines thin, their supply routes disrupted. You've bled them dry in this muddy crescent, and now it's your turn to move. You look around at the faces beside you, tired, unshaven, hollow-eyed, and for the first time in weeks you see something like hope. Not victory, not yet, but the hope that maybe, just maybe, this isn't your final chapter. The tide has shifted, and with it, so does your heart rate. You dig your boots in deeper, press your back against the trench wall, and listen for the distant sound of something rising. Is it artillery, or just the beginning of a new phase? Either way, you'll be ready. You're not used to plans working. Usually they're more like well-meaning guesses. Hold this ridge, retake that town, don't freeze to death. But this one works like clockwork. MacArthur's Incheon landing is the kind of bold gamble that war historians drool over, and now you're part of its ripple effect, pushing out from the Pusan perimeter like a spring uncoiling in reverse. Let's rewind for just a second. Imagine this, a coastal city surrounded by mudflats, wild tides, and defences so lightly manned you wonder if someone misplaced the enemy. That's Incheon in mid-September. The tides only allow for a narrow window of attack, and the whole operation depends on timing, luck, and the element of surprise, which, miraculously, you have. MacArthur's plan is insane, frankly. Amphibious landings are notoriously complex, and this one's threading a needle with a bayonet. But when the ships land and the Marines pour in, it's like opening a pressure valve. You, still down south near Pusan, hear the news not from a general's briefing, but from a radio tucked into a medic's pack. Incheon's ours, he says, as casually as someone announcing free coffee. And then the orders come. Advance north. This time, you're not retreating, regrouping, or delaying. You're chasing. North Korean forces, caught between the pincers of the Incheon landing and your southern grind, begin to unravel. Some fight on, stubborn as ever. Others drop their weapons, disguise themselves, try to slip away in civilian clothes. You don't always know who's who. The countryside passes quickly now. Towns you couldn't pronounce last week are liberated before you even get a chance to memorize their names. You walk into villages to find dazed families and bullet-riddled portraits of Kim Il-sung. Some cheer, some just stare. Everyone looks tired. You reach Suwon, then Seoul. Yes, again. The capital has become a revolving door of occupation, but this time you're taking it back on your own terms. The city is scarred, buildings gutted, wires dangling like vines. Urban combat resumes. It's street by street, rooftop to rooftop. You move through sewers, sneak through gardens. You don't sleep much. When you do, it's with your finger still curled around the trigger. One of your squad mates is hit clearing an apartment stairwell. No last words, just a surprised exhale and a quiet thud. You tape over his name on your helmet, not to forget him, but to stop obsessing over who's next. But Seoul falls officially, proudly, on September 28. The South Korean flag goes up again, flapping against a skyline that's mostly smoke. Ri returns to much fanfare, speeches about liberty, and more quietly, the resumption of arrests. You try not to think too hard about it. With the capital back and the North Koreans in full retreat, the question becomes, what now? MacArthur doesn't hesitate. Push past the 38th parallel, finish the job, reunify the peninsula under the South. The ROK Army is all for it. They've got payback in their boots. The Americans hesitate, just for a beat, thinking about China, about escalation. But MacArthur's voice booms louder than caution, and so you march. Crossing the 38th doesn't feel like crossing a line, more like stepping over a crack in a sidewalk. But geopolitically, it's an earthquake. The Chinese had warned, repeatedly, that any advance beyond the parallel would be seen as a threat. But you're told they're bluffing, that they won't dare intervene, that Mao has his hands full with domestic reforms. Historians still debate how serious China's warnings were. Were they political theatre or legitimate red lines? Was MacArthur blind to them, or did he simply not care? Whatever the truth, you aren't told any of it. You just keep moving, your boots leaving prints in northern soil that's colder, rougher, less forgiving. By early October, you reach Pyongyang. The city is eerily empty. The KPA has fled, or gone underground. It's not a victory parade. It's a ghost town with propaganda posters still clinging to damp walls. You search buildings. You confiscate rifles. You wonder what's next. Some of your comrades believe the war is almost over, that the rest of the advance to the Yalu River will be a mop-up operation. The word home starts cropping up in letters again. Holiday leave, Thanksgiving, a Christmas armistice maybe. You start to believe it too. And that, of course, is when everything flips. You see across the Yalu River, in the shadow of the mountains, something is stirring, something organized, something big. But for now, your orders are clear. Keep marching north. Keep pressing the advantage. Because surely no one would dare stop you now. Right? You'd think capturing a capital would feel more triumphant. But standing in Pyongyang, surrounded by crumbling buildings, and the ghost of every loud propaganda broadcast you ever heard, it just feels quiet. Not peaceful, though. That would imply someone actually won. And right now, you're not sure anyone has. Your boots crunch over frost-bitten gravel. The city's already been looted by its own defenders. What wasn't blown up by airstrikes or emptied during their hasty retreat. You find propaganda posters fluttering like brittle leaves. Kim Il-sung's face still smiling, even though he's reportedly fled north. You wonder if he's hiding in a cave somewhere, writing a diary entry called Oops. But there's no time to dwell. Orders roll in. Advance toward the Yalu River. That's the northern border of Korea. And just beyond it, China. Yes, that China, the one who's been shouting for weeks, that if you come too close they'll get involved. But the higher-ups insist it's bluff, that Mao's too bogged down with rebuilding his country, consolidating his new communist government, and making sure his portraits are hung straight across every village. You're not sure who came up with this theory, but they clearly haven't looked across the border recently. Still, orders are orders. So north you go, deeper into terrain that isn't just foreign, it's actively hostile. Mountains rise like jagged teeth, and the weather bites. Supplies start to lag. Maps become increasingly useless. Roads are narrow, ambushes frequent. You're entering territory the North Koreans didn't even develop much, because who'd be insane enough to march an army through here? Apparently you. The ROK forces push hardest, racing north in long columns. Some of them even reach the Yalu. They dip their boots into the river, pose for photographs, wave at the Chinese bank. No shots are fired, yet. And that's the key word now, yet. Meanwhile, MacArthur sits in Tokyo, reading reports that say things like enemy resistance minimal and reunification imminent. He drafts statements, grand ones, about freedom triumphing over tyranny, about a new Asia. You wish you could believe him. But here on the ground, the air tastes different. Too still, too cold, like a breath being held. Then it starts, not with tanks, not with fanfare, but with movement. Your patrol notices tracks, unfamiliar formations, intercepted radio traffic in Mandarin, then captured soldiers, quiet ones, saying they're just lost volunteers. You don't believe it for a second, neither does anyone else. Soon there are more, too many to ignore. You're not just chasing a broken army anymore, you're walking into a trap. Historians still argue whether the Chinese intervention was premeditated or reactive. Some say Mao had planned it from the start, waiting for the UN to overextend. Others claim it was pride, a forced move to defend China's newly stabilized border. What's certain is this: they didn't just cross the Yalu with rifles. They brought discipline, strategy, and hundreds of thousands of troops, moving mostly at night, hiding in the mountains, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment comes in late October. Suddenly, your forward units are gone. Not captured, not destroyed, just gone. Swallowed by terrain and ambushes. Communication lines go silent. Then, out of nowhere, entire Chinese divisions descend from the hills. Bugles, fireworks, assaults in freezing darkness. It's coordinated, terrifying, and unlike anything you've faced so far. The Battle of Ansan is one of the first real engagements with these volunteers. The ROK forces are hit hardest, their flanks collapsing under relentless waves. American units try to reinforce but can't keep up. You find yourself in an eerie rhythm. Fight, retreat, regroup, lose someone, repeat. You start to see Chinese uniforms in the woods, up close. Their tactics are brutal, but efficient: close-range assaults, infiltration, night raids. They move with purpose, no tanks, no flashy tech, just wave after wave of disciplined infantry, often with nothing more than rifles, grenades, and sheer willpower. The tide has turned. Again. And just like that, what felt like a final push to end the war becomes a desperate scramble southward. Pyongyang is no longer a prize. It's a trap. Seoul, once again, is in jeopardy. The lines are falling apart, faster than command can draw new ones. MacArthur, he insists this is temporary, that the Chinese can be beaten back, that winter offensives are the way forward. But you've heard that tune before, and the lyrics always end with more funerals. So you dig in, again, as snow begins to fall, as the days shorten, as the war shifts once more from movement to misery. You realize something awful. This isn't about unifying Korea anymore. It's not even about ideology. It's about not being the last soldier to die in a war no one wants to finish. You're marching south again. That's right, south. A direction that by now feels more familiar than your own name. The Chinese intervention has flipped the board, and now the UN forces, once so confident, are being pushed back across the same frozen hills they just conquered. You swear you recognize a ditch you dug 2 weeks ago, now occupied by someone else with better aim. Welcome to the Second Spring Offensive, or as you've started calling it. Didn't we already pass this, rice paddy? It's December 1950, and the Chinese People's Volunteer Army is no longer pretending to be subtle. They've gone from whispers in the hills to a full-on wave crashing down on the UN lines. You're outnumbered, outflanked, and let's just admit it, out of coffee. The one comfort is that they seem just as cold as you are. There's no dramatic collapse this time, just a relentless, grinding withdrawal. Seoul is abandoned again. That's what, the third time, fourth. At this point, the city should just install a Welcome to Occupied Seoul sign that flips every few weeks, like a diner's open-closed sign. Still, the withdrawal is better managed now. Ridgway, remember him? Grenades on his shoulders, and no patience for nonsense. He's not about glory charges or poetic speeches. He's about lines, logistics, and keeping as many of you alive as possible, which is refreshing in a bleak sort of way. Ridgway's tactics are ugly, but effective. He doesn't try to hold every inch of ground. Instead, he focuses on elastic defense. You give a little here, pull back there, let the Chinese overextend, and then you counterattack. It's like judo. but with artillery, and it starts to work. You're no longer being overrun. You're maneuvering, fighting smarter, hitting back. In early 1951, the tide shifts again. You launch Operation Thunderbolt, moving up the west side of the peninsula with methodical force. Chinese casualties mount. Their supply lines begin to fray. They're fighting in a country they don't fully understand, with soldiers who haven't eaten properly in days, and commanders who expected quick victory. Seoul retaken again by March. At this point, the city has fewer intact buildings than political slogans. You pass through its shattered streets with the numb detachment of someone too tired to celebrate. People wave, kids stare. You smile back with lips too cracked to form words. Historians still argue about this phase of the war, whether it was necessary to retake Seoul or just symbolic, whether the back and forth was strategic brilliance or tragic repetition. You don't argue, you just clean your rifle and check your boots for holes. The rest of spring is spent fortifying new lines north of Seoul, not pushing further, just holding. It's a word that's taken on sacred meaning now. Hold. Hold the ridges. Hold the bridges. Hold the night. It's not about conquest anymore. It's about not losing ground, not losing each other. You hear rumors, always rumors, about peace talks, that someone, somewhere, is finally admitting this isn't going to end with a ticker-tape parade, that maybe, just maybe, they'll sit down and talk. But until then, you dig. The front has solidified now into something grotesquely familiar, trench warfare. Not like World War I exactly. There's no mud-filled stalemate stretching across continents, but the feel is similar. Long days of waiting, short bursts of chaos, artillery duels, snipers, patrols that go out at night and don't always come back. You start naming parts of the line: Dead Man's Curve, Sniper Alley, Betty's Hill, named after the guy who died defending it. You try not to get attached to any spot on the map. Everything here feels rented. There's also psychological warfare now. Chinese loudspeakers blaring propaganda across the lines. Go home, they say in slow, scratchy English. America does not care about you. Sometimes they play jazz. Sometimes children's laughter. It's creepy. One night they play Bing Crosby. You cry, not because it's sad, because it reminds you of Christmas and home. And yet, despite everything, you're still here, still breathing, still wondering what comes next. Maybe the talks will happen. Maybe the diplomats will work their magic and put this fractured land back together with paper and promises. Or maybe, and this thought chills you more than the wind, maybe this is it. The war not as a chapter in a history book, but as a condition, a state of being, a frozen conflict, and you, the soldier, frozen with it. But not tonight. Tonight you clean your weapon, pass around a tin of rations, and stare at the stars. Somewhere north of here, a soldier just like you is doing the same. Maybe he's cold, maybe he's tired, maybe he's wondering how it all came to this. And you both know the answer won't come before sunrise. You're learning to read the land like a second language now. The ridges, the pines, the little notches in the valley walls that tell you where the mortars will fall. Welcome to mid-1951, the season of static war. You've gone from a soldier of movement to a soldier of inches. No more sweeping advances, no grand retreats, just positions, positions, and more positions. If the war were a song, this would be the bridge that loops forever. Your world shrinks to a foxhole, a hill, a trench line. You know the names: Bloody Ridge, Heartbreak Ridge, Pork Chop Hill, all places where the gain is measured in yards and the cost is lives. The names are chosen after the fact. When some general needs a title for a briefing, you'd like to name them something more honest, like Pointless Place 7 or Hill of Mostly Screaming. This phase is where the war goes numb. You dig in. Literally, trenches stretch across the Korean peninsula like fresh scars. Barbed wire, landmines, bunkers, it's all starting to look a little too familiar. You think about World War I, how they said never again. But here you are, bayonet in hand, standing in a trench filled with rainwater and unresolved tension. And across from you, just a few hundred meters away, the Chinese are doing the exact same thing, building their own trenches, laying their own wire, watching you through scopes and binoculars. It's a Mexican standoff at continental scale. You still patrol at night. That hasn't changed. Night raids, wire cutting, ambushes, it's all part of the rhythm. You start to forget what day it is, what month. Time is counted in artillery barrages and supply drops. Every now and then someone yells, "Peace talks are starting," and there's a flicker of hope, but then nothing changes. The talks are held in Kaesong, and later Panmunjom, but for the soldier in the dirt, they might as well be happening on Mars. Historians still argue what these talks were really about. Were they sincere negotiations, or just strategic pauses to regroup, rearm, and adjust the maps? You're not sure. You only know that every time you hear negotiation, it's followed by an enemy mortar 2 days later. You're rotated out occasionally, not for vacation, just to another section of the line that hasn't been shelled yet. You meet new guys, some green, still wide-eyed, some older, hard as nails, with voices like gravel and names like Tex. You don't ask too many questions anymore. Names stick, death sticks harder. Then comes Bloody Ridge, a 3-week nightmare in August. You climb up and down the same hill every day, dodging grenades, hurling your own, hoping to find cover before the next burst. The hill is taken, lost, retaken, abandoned, taken again. You watch friends die over a patch of dirt you wouldn't have looked at twice before the war. Finally, it's yours, officially. You cheer half-heartedly, because you know the next hill is just over the ridge. Next comes Heartbreak Ridge. Even worse. A month of rain, blood, and bitter irony. The North Koreans have dug in so deep, they're practically part of the geology. You move slowly, painfully, with each advance measured in blood. One of your squad mates mutters, "This hill better have a vending machine at the top." It doesn't. Just more sandbags and a sniper you can't see. And yet, the lines don't move much. The war's front becomes like a frozen wave, poised mid-crash, but never quite falling. You wonder if this is the new normal, a war that never ends, just settles. But even in this madness, there are moments of strange beauty. You share a cigarette with a South Korean soldier who teaches you curse words in his dialect. You get a letter from home with a photo of your dog looking very confused. One night, during a lull, both sides accidentally pause fire long enough for you to hear wind through the grass. There are rumors again. Armistice talks, restarting, Panmunjom this time. You hear someone say, maybe by Christmas. No one bothers to ask which year. The war has entered its loop phase. Brutal, efficient, senseless. And yet you still show up for roll call, still clean your weapon, still try to sleep with one eye open, and both ears tuned to the quiet that comes before another storm. The Koreas have become a graveyard of certainty. Every side once knew what it wanted. Now you just want to go home with enough of your body and soul left to recognize the place. But for tonight, the line holds. You hold. And across the ridge, someone else is doing the exact same thing, wondering if tomorrow will be the day someone calls this whole mess off. But tomorrow is still a long way off. By now, you've stopped dreaming about victory. What you dream about, if you're lucky enough to sleep, is dry socks and hot food. The war, officially, is still happening, but it no longer behaves like a war. It's a ritual, each side entrenched, each day predictable in its misery. Welcome to late 1951, a year when the Korean War becomes less about winning and more about not losing face. Your job? Hold the line. Again, always. You cycle between outposts like Pork Chop Hill, Old Baldy, White Horse, names that sound like rejected amusement park rides. You dig, patrol, fortify, repeat. When someone yells incoming, you don't even flinch, you just drop into the nearest hole and wait. The armistice talks are now months deep, and going nowhere fast. They started with big ideas, ending hostilities, prisoner exchange, drawing new borders, but they've bogged down over things like who sits where at the negotiating table. Literally, the shape of the table became a topic. Imagine explaining that to the families of the dead. Meanwhile, you're still here, in your borrowed patch of earth, wondering how long it takes for a war to forget why it started. The 38th parallel is roughly where the front line rests now, the same line where this whole nightmare began. Only now, that line is surrounded by barbed wire, minefields, and a kind of quiet madness. You start to notice something strange. Soldiers on both sides are becoming mirror images. Same trenches, same sleepless stares, same bored expressions during lulls in the shelling. If you squint hard enough across no man's land, you could mistake your enemy for your reflection. One morning, a Chinese loudspeaker crackles to life. It plays a jazz tune, Benny Goodman. Then a voice, "Go home, GI. This war is not yours." A few guys chuckle. One guy cries. No one admits to anything. Ridgway, now elevated to command, Far East operations, maintains pressure with targeted offensives. But the strategy is no longer about conquering. It's about gaining leverage at the negotiating table. Each hill you capture adds weight to a diplomat's sentence. Each casualty subtracts it. You're now a chess piece in a game played entirely off the board. Operation Commando in October 1951 is a textbook example. You attack the Iron Triangle, a strategic junction in central Korea. The operation succeeds, militarily, but what changes? Not much. The enemy simply regroups. You move from one fortified hill to the next, like it's a game of geopolitical whack-a-mole. Historians still debate whether this period was necessary. Some say it was a way to bleed the enemy into negotiation. Others call it a tragic loop, a war stuck buffering. All you know is that your world remains a 6-foot trench and a sky filled with whispers and shrapnel. Then there's the POW problem. You start hearing about it from news scraps and sergeants who've been talking to higher-ups. The armistice has stalled, in part because of the prisoners. The UN insists on voluntary repatriation. Prisoners should choose whether to return home. The communists want everyone back, whether they like it or not. It's an ideological pissing match disguised as policy. The truth. Many POWs on both sides are terrified of going back. North Korean defectors know what awaits them. Re-education at best, execution at worst. Some Chinese POWs have embraced anti-communism. Some have simply tasted things like coffee and toothbrushes and don't want to return to life as volunteers who didn't get a choice in the first place. Meanwhile, you watch the skies. The weather is turning. Winter comes fast here, and when it does, everything gets harder. Your rations freeze before you can open them. Your rifle needs warming just to fire. Patrols stumble through snowdrifts deeper than your dignity. Frostbite claims more fingers than bullets. And still, the war hums. That's the only word for it, like an old refrigerator that never shuts off. It doesn't scream anymore. It doesn't roar. It just hums. Persistent, dull, background noise to your existence. You start finding ways to pass time, carving dice from shell casings, brewing bootleg coffee in helmets, reading the same letter 10 times because it's the only voice from home that doesn't tell you to stay strong. Some guys start talking about what they'll do after the war. Open a shop, go to school, never eat powdered eggs again. You just want a door that locks and a mattress that doesn't sink. And so you wait, not for an order, not even for peace, just for a sign that someone, somewhere, remembers you're still here, that the war is still a problem, not just a statistic. For now, the front holds. So do you. You get used to the sound of negotiations, the way you get used to tinnitus, always there, never helpful, mostly annoying. It's 1952 now, and the armistice talks at Panmunjom are somehow still happening. They've been happening longer than some soldiers have been alive. You picture the conference room like a bad sitcom set, the same suits, the same arguments, the same cups of tea growing colder by the minute. But the war, oh, the war is still very much on. Stalemate doesn't mean silence, it means routine violence. The lines don't move much, but the body count ticks upward, like a cynical metronome. You start the year on a ridge, with no name yet. Every hill eventually earns one, but you don't get to pick. That's reserved for someone in a press office far from the mud. You just hold it, patrol it, die on it, if that's what the day demands. The Chinese are digging in harder now, not just trenches, but underground fortresses, bunkers, tunnels, reinforced positions so complex you'd think they were building a subway system. You raid one once. It's like descending into the roots of a particularly paranoid tree. Maps line the walls, generators hum, the air smells like wet socks and desperation. You learn that they call you the invaders. Which is funny because from your foxhole, they're the ones doing most of the invading lately. Still, Ridgway presses on with limited offensives, and now he's replaced by General Mark Clark, a man whose primary mission is to end the war without ending the world. That means fighting just enough to gain leverage, but not enough to cause global thermonuclear awkwardness. It's a delicate balance, like tap dancing on a minefield. Clark inherits a war of tactical symbolism. Each hill you take is less about strategy and more about headlines. One such headline, Battle of Old Baldy. You hear the name, and it sounds almost cute, like a cartoon owl. Then you get there, and it's anything but. Old Baldy is a lonely bump in the terrain near Kolwan, devoid of vegetation, covered in craters and sorrow. You fight for it for days. Then the enemy takes it. Then you take it back. Eventually you stop asking why. It's just another square in the checkerboard, stained with the same red. And while you're doing that, somewhere in Panmunjom, a man in a pressed uniform is arguing about the placement of flagpoles. No, really, that's not a metaphor. That actually happens. The negotiations stall over the height and positioning of flags on the conference table. Historians still shake their heads over it. You just shake yours because you've lost another friend to an artillery shell during ceasefire season. That's another thing. The war during talks is like a polite mugging. Both sides pretend they're not fighting, but the mortars don't lie. The bullets don't pause. The only thing frozen is progress. And then, one day, the prisoner issue becomes the big topic. It's not about how to end the war anymore. It's about what to do with the people who've already survived it. The UN insists that no one should be forced to go back. China and North Korea say everyone must return, no exceptions. And you, a guy with mud in your socks and a rifle that jams if you breathe wrong, are supposed to care about political principles now. You don't. You just want fewer patrols and warmer beans. The irony, some of the fiercest fighting happens during this period when the war is winding down. Places like Triangle Hill and White Horse Mountain become killing grounds over patches of land that months from now will be abandoned as part of the final border arrangement. You fight for land that no one will keep. You bleed for symbolism. Still you march. Still you dig. Still you try to find meaning in a war that doesn't seem interested in providing any. One night, during a lull, a guy in your unit, Eddie from New Jersey, reads from a book he found in a shelled-out schoolhouse. Poetry. You don't remember the title, but one line sticks with you. Men die in war not for flags, but for each other. You look around your trench and realize it's true. You're not here because of Truman or MacArthur or democracy. You're here because the guy next to you still breathes, and because you promised to help him keep doing that. The talks continue. The shelling continues. The trench water continues to rise. And you just try to hold on to whatever pieces of yourself haven't frozen into the landscape yet. By now, the phrase "peace is coming" feels less like a promise and more like a punchline. It's 1952. deep into the third year of a war that was supposed to be a fast shuffle of flags and slogans. And yet here you are, back on the same muddy hill, holding the same rusty entrenching tool, wondering if you've become part of the terrain. This phase is where the war slips into its final form, political theatre wrapped in barbed wire. The battlefield doesn't change much, but the players keep rotating. Truman's on his way out, and the US presidential election looms large. The soldiers on the line don't get to vote. Not really, but you all have opinions, especially when a certain general turned candidate starts making headlines. Yes, that's right. Dwight D. Eisenhower, your old boss's boss's boss, is running for president. The guy who led the D-Day landings. The man with a face like an annoyed eagle. He promises to go to Korea if elected, which sounds like either a threat or a very grim vacation. When he wins in November, there's a ripple through the trenches. Not celebration, exactly. More like cautious relief. Eisenhower, at least, understands war. Maybe he won't treat it like a debate club with live ammunition. But until he takes office, the war stumbles on, fueled by habit and inertia. The front lines are now so static, so mapped and memorized, they feel like badly planned suburbs. You know which shell craters to avoid, which ridges to duck behind, and which sections of barbed wire have been chewed open by winter. And through it all, the psychological warfare ramps up. Propaganda leaflets drift down like deadly snowflakes. Some promise warmth and food if you surrender. Others depict cartoonish UN soldiers stabbing Korean children. You try not to laugh or cry. You're not sure which reaction is more appropriate anymore. You get reassigned to Outpost Harry for a week. The name sounds harmless, but the place is anything but. It's a lonely bump just off the main line, constantly shelled, constantly watched. The enemy knows everything about it. So do you. You stare across no man's land and feel the strange sense that the guy on the other side is probably as tired of this as you are. That night, you're on watch, and you hear something. Singing. Faint in Mandarin. A lullaby, maybe? You don't recognize the tune, but it's soft and oddly human, and for a moment the war feels like it's being held underwater, distant, distorted, almost not real. But then someone trips a mine, and the spell breaks. Meanwhile, the prisoner of war issue boils hotter. Some Chinese POWs riot in camps, refusing repatriation. North Korean detainees carve anti-communist slogans into their barracks walls. The UN insists no one should be forced to return to a regime they fear. The communists call that brainwashing. The talks freeze again. Historians still argue if the prisoner issue prolonged the war unnecessarily, or if it was a moral stand worth fighting for. You don't have the luxury of that debate. You just know that every time the diplomats stall, someone on your side dies on a hill they were never supposed to hold. Then comes a little switch, a partial exchange of sick and wounded POWs. A gesture, a warm-up act for the real deal. Some come back missing limbs, others missing pieces of their minds. You watch the stretchers roll off the trucks and wonder how many more will join them before someone finally says enough. Eisenhower keeps his promise. He visits Korea in December 1952. He doesn't tour the front lines, but he gets close enough to feel the frostbite in the air. His message is simple. This can't go on. Behind the scenes, he nudges his advisors, speaks to allies, applies pressure. He doesn't scream like MacArthur. He doesn't bluster. He just works. And for the first time in months, something starts to shift. Not in the trenches, not yet, but in the way commanders talk, in the way maps are drawn, in the way the phrase ceasefire line starts replacing kill zone in briefings. It's not over, but now it might end. Still, you dig. Still you fight. You lose a guy on patrol who just got his transfer papers. You find a puppy near the mess tent, and name it maybe. It bites your boot and sleeps on your coat. The war hasn't ended, but hope is back. Just not enough to take off your boots. Not yet. Spring returns to Korea like a ghost with unfinished business. The snow melts, the mud deepens, and the war unbelievably drags on. It's 1953 now, and by all accounts the end is near. But what they don't tell you is that the end of a war can be just as deadly as the beginning. You're still stationed near the Iron Triangle, a familiar knot of ridges and valleys, where offensives go to die. The war might be winding down on paper, but up here, it's business as usual. Mines, mortars, midnight raids. The enemy hasn't gotten the memo. Or maybe they did, and they're just bad at goodbyes. That's the paradox of this final stretch. Everyone knows it's almost over, and yet the fighting intensifies, almost as if both sides want to leave a lasting mark before the curtain falls. You hear the term limited offensives tossed around, which is just a polite way of saying we still don't know how to stop. Take Outpost Vegas, for instance. In March, UN troops, mostly US Marines and South Koreans, dig in against a relentless Chinese assault. The place turns into a meat grinder, artillery so thick it sounds like thunder with a hangover. You weren't there, thank the stars, but you meet guys who were. Their eyes look like glass, smooth, polished, and hollow. And then there's the Chinese Spring Offensive. It's not a full-scale push, but it's enough to remind everyone that the guns still work. Positions are attacked, lost, retaken, lost again. You're sent to reinforce Porkchop Hill. Yes, again, that cursed lump of earth refuses to stay quiet. The Chinese want it. Command says we need it. You wonder if anyone ever asked the hill how it feels about the whole affair. Porkchop becomes a symbol, not of victory, not even of strategy, just of stubbornness. Men die there so that others won't have to admit the futility of it all. You're ordered to hold, so you hold with everything you've got, and when the dust clears, it's still yours, technically, but at what cost? Meanwhile, Panmunjom continues to host the world's slowest peace talks. Delegates argue over prisoner repatriation, line placement, the shape of future peace. It's like watching glaciers race snails. Every inch of progress comes wrapped in 10 pounds of paperwork. Then comes Operation Big Switch, the full-scale prisoner exchange. It's not official yet, but the rumours fly like pigeons. Thousands of POWs will go home. Some don't want to, others cry tears you pretend not to notice. You think of your own face, reflected in the eyes of prisoners you've guarded, eyes that see you as both captor and comrade, depending on the weather and the food. Historians later call this period the cruel peace, because it's not peaceful. It's a final accumulation of trauma, just under the wire. Everyone wants to stop, but no one wants to be the last one shot before the armistice is signed. So the machine keeps running, its gears sticky with politics and pride. And while the diplomats posture, you're living minute to minute. Letters arrive from home with the phrase, "when it's finally over." They contain recipes, gossip, photos, and the kind of hopeful ignorance you envy. One even includes a newspaper clipping, "Truce expected soon." You pin it inside your helmet, not for protection, just for proof. Then there's the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, already being discussed, drawn, debated. It will eventually become the world's most ironic name for the most militarized strip of land on Earth. But for now, it's just a hypothetical line on a map, and you're still bleeding in the mud waiting for someone to make it real. Your unit gets rotated, again, this time to a quieter sector. Quiet, of course, meaning only 2 shellings a day. You meet a new guy who swears he saw a ceasefire draft. You don't believe him, but you smile anyway. It's easier than explaining that optimism feels like a foreign language now. One night, while cleaning your rifle, you pause, not because of gunfire, but because it's the first truly silent moment you've had in weeks. No shells, no shouting, no boots on gravel, just the wind. You wonder if the war just stopped. You consider waking someone to confirm, but then you don't. because for that one moment it feels like maybe, just maybe, peace is practicing before it goes live. But morning comes, and the radio crackles, and the game resumes. You lace up your boots, again, because until the ink dries, until the last POW is counted, until someone says go home, you're still a soldier in a war that refuses to close the curtain. Almost over. But not yet. It happens quietly, like most real endings do. No trumpet blasts, no ticker tape, just a string of dates and whispers that finally turn into headlines. On July 27, 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement is signed, and just like that, no victory, no surrender, the war is paused, not ended, paused. You don't even hear it from your commander. You hear it from a guy cleaning a Browning, who mutters, "They signed it." You look up, half expecting someone to shout, "Just kidding." But no, this time it sticks. There's no celebration, just quiet. Shells don't fall that night. Patrols are pulled back. No one talks louder than they have to, like words might jinx the moment. You're ordered to pull back 2 kilometers from the line. So is the other side. This forms the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. It's anything but demilitarized, of course. You still need binoculars to see through the barbed wire, but it's symbolic, which means more now than it ever has. You stare across the clearing at enemy positions. You expect something cinematic, hands raised, smiles exchanged, but the enemy just stares back. Same uniforms, same blank expressions, probably thinking the same thing you are. That's it. You'd think an armistice would feel like a weight lifted, but really it feels like holding your breath underwater and then realizing you're not sure how to surface anymore. You've been down here too long. Your lungs have adapted. The final prisoner exchanges begin almost immediately. Operation Big Switch rolls into motion. Buses, planes, guards. You watch as men who look like walking skeletons step onto transport and vanish back into the countries that once sent them here. Some weep, others laugh, a few just stare, as if time stopped and forgot to restart. You're assigned to help process a group of returning UN prisoners. One of them, an American pilot, walks off the truck with a limp and salutes you before you can salute him. You ask how long he was in a camp. Long enough, he says, and that's all he wants to share. The war becomes history the moment the last signature dries. And yet, no one calls it peace, because it isn't. The Korean peninsula remains divided, scarred, ideologically opposed. The border that once ignited the war now cements it, a frozen line between 2 versions of the future. North Korea begins rebuilding under Kim Il-sung's iron grip, gradually turning into the isolated, authoritarian regime the world will come to know. The South rebuilds slowly under Ri's rule with all the political messiness and economic trauma that war leaves behind. You're told to pack up. No parade, no speech, just paperwork, a medal if you're lucky, maybe a train ticket. You fold your gear like it matters and wonder what normal life is supposed to feel like after all this. Historians still debate what the Korean War achieved. Containment? Perhaps. Stalemate? Absolutely. A message to other nations about the US's willingness to defend the post-war order? Probably. But when you're sitting in a transport truck watching Korea disappear behind you, none of that feels particularly real. You don't think in geopolitics. You think in smells, gunpowder, wet socks, rice cooking in dented pots. You think of faces, the ones who made it out and the ones who didn't. You think of hills with names that don't mean anything outside this war, but mean everything to the people who bled on them. Back home, they call it the Forgotten War. Too small to be glorious, too long to be brief. Sandwiched between World War II and Vietnam, it becomes a shadow, acknowledged but rarely examined. You carry it anyway. Because war doesn't end when the papers are signed. It ends slowly, over years, in night sweats and flashbacks and the sound of thunder that isn't always thunder. The Korean War was supposed to be a lesson, but no one agrees on what it taught, only that it's over, sort of. So now you're home, or well, you're somewhere that's not Korea, which is close enough for government work. The landscape is different, the air smells less like cordite, and people ask you dumb questions like, "So how was it over there?" as if you went to summer camp, and not a 3-year war of mud, ice, and paperwork. Welcome to the post-war void, that awkward silence where memory collides with confusion, because technically the war's over, but practically it never gave you closure, just a plane ride, a folded uniform, and an itch in your brain that no scratching can reach. Back home, the headlines have moved on. Eisenhower is in office, suburban lawns are being mowed, and kids are learning about duck and cover drills. The Cold War has shifted gears. Korea's yesterday's crisis. You can tell because when people shake your hand, they squint like they're trying to remember if Korea was the one with the Nazis. They call it a police action. Remember, not a war, a United Nations intervention. As if semantics can sweep the dead under the rug. You know better. You saw what not a war looks like when it shells your outpost for 5 hours and doesn't send flowers. You meet other vets, in bars, in hospitals, at the VA. You recognize the gait, slightly off, like they're always stepping over memories. You don't always talk about it. Sometimes just a nod does the job. Other times you swap stories the way old folks compare recipes. What unit were you with? You ever get stuck up near Chosen? Man, pork chop was a mess. Historians still try to wrap the Korean War in a bow. They cite statistics, nearly 5 million casualties, most of them Korean civilians, over 36,000 Americans dead, plus thousands more from UN allies like Britain, Turkey, and Ethiopia. South Korea's infrastructure in ruins. North Korea, well, whatever it was before, it's something darker now. The numbers feel cold. You remember warm faces, faces covered in dirt, some with jokes, some with blood, some you only knew for a day, but still visit in dreams. You wonder what happened to the people you met, the Korean kids who used to beg for rations, the Ralke soldier who shared his last cigarette with you, the Chinese POW who never said a word, the enemy soldier whose eyes you locked with before the shell hit. Where are they now? The war may have ended at Panmunjom, but Korea remains frozen. 2 Koreas, 2 realities, 1 peninsula, still divided by barbed wire and ideology. You watch the news now and then and see stories of skirmishes at the DMZ. Technically the war never ended, just paused. And in a way, that's how it lives in you, paused. A part of your mind you never fully unpack. A drawer you never open because you're afraid of what it smells like inside. Sometimes you hear jokes about the forgotten war, and they sting more than you expect, because you haven't forgotten. You couldn't, even if you wanted to. You still hear the distant bugle calls in the back of your mind, still flinch at the wrong kind of silence, still carry the weight of hills that didn't matter, except to the men who died trying to hold them. The medals gather dust, the thank yous grow fewer. You watch parades on TV where no one mentions Korea between the bombs of Daeche and the flames of Vietnam. It's like your war became a footnote. But footnotes, you know, are where the real stories hide. You write letters to old friends. Some return, some don't. You attend one funeral and recognize too many faces. Everyone is older. No one says the word hero, just he served. You think that's probably enough. There's a museum now. They built one in Washington. Korean War Memorial. It's cold stone and quiet statues, etched with faces that look like yours did back then. You visit once. You stare at your reflection in the polished granite. It stares back. A soldier, forgotten by some, but not by you. Not ever. Time marches on, because it must, not because it cares. The war you carried like a shadow eventually merges with the long road of decades. And somehow Korea becomes history, not just in textbooks, but in your own memory. Blurred edges, missing names, hills with no more echoes, and yet the division remains. The armistice may have frozen the guns, but it didn't thaw the peninsula. North Korea retreats into isolation, rebuilding as a fortress kingdom under Kim Il-sung, who transforms his image from general to godhead. Statues rise, slogans multiply, famine lurks, decades away, but the seeds are sown in secrecy and control. The South, it struggles. Democracy is more theory than practice for a long time. Syngman Rhee, the so-called father of South Korea, tightens his grip with purges and paranoia. Eventually he's ousted, but not before sowing his own version of fear into the soil. The people rebuild, city by city, but the trauma lingers. A nation alive but not yet whole. You watch it from afar, at first. News clips, radio snippets. Occasionally a special report reminds you the DMZ is still there. The 38th parallel hasn't moved an inch, even as the world changes entirely around it. You go to reunions, sit in folding chairs in gymnasiums, next to men who once bled beside you. Someone brings a map and points to it with a knuckle that's missing 2 joints. That's where they shelled us, right there. No one argues. You all nod. You all remember it differently, but you nod anyway. Truth gets blurry with time, but the pain stays vivid. You start seeing Korea through your children's eyes, or your grandchildren's. They ask questions, usually around school projects. Were you scared? Did you shoot anyone? Did you win? You never know how to answer that last one. Did you win? The war ended, without a victory. No conquest, no surrender. Just a pause, a signature, a line. Maybe the real victory was in the survival, in the endurance, in making it home with enough of yourself left to still be you. That seems worth something. Historians still wrestle with Korea's legacy. Was it a necessary check on communism? A regional conflict inflated by Cold War paranoia? A blueprint for future proxy wars? Or just one long bitter misunderstanding no one had the courage to stop earlier? The Cold War rolls on, through Berlin and Cuba and Vietnam, and with every new front, people whisper that maybe Korea was just the first chapter, the dry run, the dress rehearsal for a world where wars are cold until they suddenly aren't. Meanwhile, you find your peace where you can, in Sunday coffee, in the rustle of newspaper pages, in the quiet of a porch swing on a windless day. Sometimes you see a helicopter and don't flinch. Sometimes you don't. But the silence of memory, that still creeps in. You talk less about the war now, not because you're ashamed, but because the words no longer feel like they belong to this time. Saying Chosun aloud is like summoning a ghost. Saying Heartbreak Ridge still makes your hands tighten. And then, decades later, something strange happens. South Korea rises not just from the rubble, but into one of the world's strongest economies. Seoul glows with neon and ambition. Democracy takes hold, slowly, clumsily, but solidly. You see K-pop idols on late-night talk shows. You see Korean phones in American hands. You see the country you fought for becoming something more than a name on a map. You wonder what your buddies would think if they saw it now. North Korea, meanwhile, becomes a time capsule. Hermit kingdom, nuclear state, a world stuck in the slogans of 1953, still playing by the same old rules of fear and loyalty and tightly staged parades. The line still holds. The guns still face each other. The DMZ still hums with tension. But you, somehow, have moved on, or tried to. The Korean War may be a shadow in the world's memory, but it's the shape of your soul, and some shapes never fade. Years later, you find yourself watching a documentary late at night, grainy footage of men in parkas, frozen rivers, explosions that bloom like grey flowers. The voiceover says the Korean War was a pivotal moment in Cold War history. You sip your tea. You think, that's one way to put it. They show maps, arrows, photos of generals with stern faces and stiff collars, and yet none of that captures the feeling of slipping in a trench half filled with slush, or of hearing the wind whisper through pine needles moments before a shell hits. None of it conveys the absurdity of trading a hill for blood, and then giving it up 2 weeks later to trade again. But history, you've realized, isn't about the blood. It's about what survives. And somehow, in spite of everything, South Korea did. You begin to reflect on what your generation did, what it cost, what it meant. It's a quiet reflection. You don't talk about it in parades or at podiums. You talk about it when the room is still, and the memories come back in waves too soft to resist. Not nightmares anymore, not always. Sometimes just faces, sounds, the smell of oil on a rifle bolt. There's something bittersweet in watching Korea grow. You helped defend a country you barely understood, fought in a place where even the dirt felt unfamiliar. And now, decades later, you see that place thriving, democratic elections, technology hubs, music, cinema, invention. The irony, most of the people enjoying that freedom have never heard of Old Baldy or Chosin or you, and yet you don't mind. Because the whole point of sacrifice is that it's invisible. If people have to remember you to benefit from what you gave, it wasn't really a gift. The Korean War becomes a chapter in school books, somewhere between Ep-Wanhwai and Vietnam. Occasionally, a teacher assigns a paper, a student Googles why did the Korean War start, and writes a paragraph that ends in "and they're still divided today." That's accurate in a way, but incomplete, because what the textbooks won't tell them, what you wish they could understand, is how personal it all became, how every hill, every withdrawal, every absurd order to hold this position until further notice wasn't just strategy. It was a series of choices made by young men who didn't want to die, but didn't want to abandon each other either. Historians still argue about the lessons of Korea. They quote Clausewitz and containment theory. They use phrases like asymmetric warfare and post-colonial conflict structures. And you want to yell, have any of you ever been cold for 6 days straight with a broken boot and a friend bleeding out in your lap? But you don't, because that's not your role anymore. You start to write some of it down, not for the world, for your kids, for the grandkids who might one day ask, what was it like? You don't give them battle reports. You give them stories about the guy who carved chess pieces out of shell casings, the foxhole poet, the medic who hummed jazz while patching wounds, the time you saw both sides stop shooting because it was snowing so beautifully, no one wanted to spoil it. You include the ugly bits, too, the mistakes, the fear, the feeling that sometimes you weren't the hero, just someone who got lucky. One of your grandkids takes that journal and turns it into a college essay. Another uses it for a podcast. You hear your name, or at least your nickname, in a recording and smile. Maybe this is how wars are remembered, not through flags or movies, but through little echoes passed down in new voices. And as the world rushes on, forgetting in the way it always does, you remember in the way only survivors can. Not perfectly, but enough. Always enough. You're older now, not just in age, but in rhythm. The way time folds in on itself, the way silence has become a close friend. Some nights you sit on your porch, the moon casting long shadows across your lawn, and you think about borders, not just the 38th parallel, though it certainly makes the list, but all the invisible lines we draw to feel safe. You think about how Korea, this little jagged peninsula, became a global fault line, a test tube for ideologies, a place where young people died so old men could draw maps and call it peace. And now, decades later, that line still holds, not just on a map, but in the hearts of millions. Some say it's the most fortified border on Earth. Landmines, sensors, guards with binoculars, and yet in one of the strangest ironies, That space, the DMZ, has also become a sanctuary for wildlife. Without humans, the cranes and wildcats returned. The trees grew undisturbed. Nature apparently does not care for our politics. That makes you chuckle sometimes. The one place where peace exists in Korea is a buffer zone built for war. There's something poetic about that, if you squint. You follow the news occasionally. A summit here, a handshake there. Every few years, north and south pretend to inch closer. Then someone fires a missile, or says something dumb, and everything freezes again, like one of those broken cassette tapes you used to keep in your glove compartment. But even that is different now. The Cold War is over, allegedly, but the ghosts still linger. You see them in policy debates, in strategic alliances, in how quickly people reach for words like containment or rogue state. Still, historians keep revisiting Korea like it's some sort of case study. Was it the first modern war, the first media war, the first UN war, the first forgotten war? Historians still argue whether Korea was a turning point or a tragic loop, a conflict that foreshadowed Vietnam, or one that simply stalled the inevitable. And in your quieter moments, you wonder if maybe it was all of the above, or none. You think of your friends, the ones who made it, the ones who didn't, the ones who did, but never really came home. You remember the look in their eyes, tired, watchful, a little amused, like they knew the punchline to a very dark joke. And maybe you do too, now. Because the joke wasn't about politics, it was about permanence, how nothing really ends. Not wars, not grief, not the dreams of men with flags, and the urge to redraw the world. But also, and this matters, not joy, not kindness, not the goofy optimism that made you play cards in foxholes or trade cigarettes with strangers or sketch cartoons on rations boxes. Those things last, too. The war didn't give you clarity, it gave you complexity, and maybe that's a better gift, because simple answers are for simple times. And if there's one thing Korea taught you, it's that life is rarely simple. You pass that wisdom on now, in stories, in nods, in the way you listen when someone younger talks about their own struggles, like they're the first person to ever feel lost. You don't interrupt, you just smile. You've seen lost before, it always finds its way somewhere. And you? You keep going. You volunteer at the local museum. You answer questions from curious teenagers who can't believe you're that old. You laugh when they ask if you used horses. You take pride in the fact that you once flew halfway across the world, got shot at by communists, froze your toes off, and still managed to fall in love with a nurse named Elaine. Even if it didn't last. Because some things aren't about permanence, they're about presence, being there, living through it, carrying the story forward, even when no one seems to be listening. But someone always is, even now. And so you stand here, not literally, not in some dramatic trench silhouette against a backlit sunset, but emotionally. You stand at the final page of a long, disjointed chapter. The Korean War ended without really ending, like a half-closed door, like an exhale that never quite turns into breath. But you kept breathing, you lived past it, and that's something. By the summer of 1953, the guns slow, the mud settles, the air raids taper off, but peace doesn't come with fanfare or clarity. It comes with paperwork. A ceasefire signed not by leaders, but by delegates, under pressure, in a tent at Panmunjom. No reunification, no resolution, just an armistice and a line 2.5 miles wide, stretching coast to coast. The DMZ, a scar pretending to be a seam. You don't sign it. Neither does Syngman Rhee. He rages, of course, dreams of a peninsula, united under democracy, or at least his version of it. But the Americans push back hard, because the goal, by now, isn't victory. It's containment, stability, an acceptable stalemate. Everyone is exhausted, including the Chinese, who need to rebuild a country bigger than most continents. So the war ends with a shrug, and you're left with questions. Did we win? Depends who you ask. The South is still standing, wealthier now, democratic, mostly, with Wi-Fi that makes yours look embarrassing. The North? Starved, secretive, nuclear-armed, its own kind of victory, if you define victory as nobody conquered us and we can still scare people. Historians still argue whether the Korean War set the stage for Vietnam or delayed something worse, whether MacArthur's sacking was justice or sabotage, whether China's intervention was bold, reckless, or inevitable, whether the Soviet Union really wanted this war or just used it to test American will. But you remember the faces, the Turkish soldier who shared his rations, the British commando who smoked too much and told dirty jokes before dawn, the Korean orphan who tagged along your convoy, silent and wide-eyed, disappearing one morning like a dream too delicate to stay. You remember winter, not just the cold, but the kind that eats inside your bones, a silence so deep it made the world feel hollow. You remember laughing anyway, because what else do you do in hell? You remember radio static, coffee too weak, boots that never dried, the sound of distant shelling like an angry god dragging furniture across the sky, the way you sang out-of-tune Christmas carols in a sandbag bunker because someone said it was December 24th. You remember hope, that ridiculous stubborn flame, the one that flickered inside every letter from home, every handshake between allies, every moment you stared at the horizon and thought, maybe next year, maybe next week, maybe someday. And maybe that's the real lesson, not in politics, not in treaties, but in people, the way humans cling to meaning, the way we write songs about places we've never seen, the way we remember wars, not just by maps and numbers, but by feeling. You were there, you felt it, you carried it forward. And now, as you close your eyes, you realize something else. The Korean War isn't just forgotten. It's remembered quietly, in sleep, in stories passed down at kitchen tables, in museums visited by bored kids on field trips who don't yet know what loss really means. And that's okay. Some wars are remembered by statues, others by silence. This one lives in the gaps between memory and myth, in the breath before sleep, in the dreams of someone who made it home, like you. Now, as you drift beneath the soft cover of sleep, let the echo of distant memories settle like dust on an untouched book. The story has ended, yes, but its echo remains, delicate as snow on a quiet morning. The faces fade, the voices soften, and even the boom of cannons becomes no louder than a heartbeat, distant and calm. Breathe in, feel the weight of time lift from your chest. You've traveled decades tonight, across frozen hills, whispered tents, flickering radio static. You've walked with soldiers and diplomats, orphans and emperors, knowing that history is not a thing made of stone, but of size and choices, lost letters and long roads. The Korean War was never about glory. It was about surviving the cold when warmth seemed extinct. It was about finding meaning in a world divided by ideologies, but bound still by the small kindnesses of strangers. And now that world can rest. The lines on the map are still there, but your body need not carry them tonight. As you close your eyes, let the 38th parallel melt into a quiet stream. Let generals become clouds, uniforms become leaves, and the long strange war become just a path beneath your feet. You are safe now. The noise is gone. The lessons remain. And as your breath slows, remember, you are not forgotten. You are part of this story, and this story will sleep beside you. Good night, soldier.